Here is Sailor Studio 223. This is a dark purple with hints of blue undertones. The undertones are easily explainable by looking at the chromatography, but a very nice dark purple. As a very dark purple, you may have to look very closely to see the shading in the writing sample, but it is there. There is, at times, a very noticeable tone shift as papers change. Now, on non-fountain pen friendly paper, the tone frequently lightens and makes the fact of there being purple very obvious. While there are no issues with feathering, this is a great deep ink this can get very deep as an ink on some paper, but never actually bleeds through to the next page. I am having problems with words. Wow. Since I generally use some better papers, I probably wouldn't have a problem owning a bottle of this.
The pen for today is a Retro 51 Tornado. And now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Here is that very, very dark, rich purple that almost on its own crosses the line of that looks like a black with something special about it. And that's one of the things that I have really come to enjoy in doing all of these reviews, that it's almost black, but it's not. There's something special there. Doesn't feather, doesn't spread, doesn't shade, does look amazing on the page. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, easily continuing all of those important notes back here.
Sailor makes more than one ink, so let's take a look at a few other inks from Sailor.
Here is Sailor Studio 167. Here is Sailor Bungu Box Melancholic Gray. Here is Sailor Mother Pink. Here is Sailor Kobe number 21.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
I know that it's hard to tell, but looking at the tone, it's just a little bit darker than it was on the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, I'm going to say, but I'm going to point out a shady spot because it's only ever tiny a bit. Look at we and have on the third line. The W in the we is just a little bit lighter than the E, and in have, the A is just a little bit lighter than the rest of the word. So there is a tiny bit of shading available, not that standout feature. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting. The story goes on.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Looking at the tone on the page, it is almost the same as what we had on the Clairfontaine. I'm going to say that I, in person, see just a little bit more hints of some of the blue undertones, but it's only ever so slightly, and I have to get close to see it. So it's not something that's just going to be readily out there. This is a very opaque ink with really no shifting going on because of the tone of the paper. Or maybe that slightly more blue undertone showing is a result of the tone. Who could say? It's not like I'm not an expert. I'm just an idiot with a camera. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, does not shade, just looks great the whole time. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
The tone we're getting here is just a little bit lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. Noticeably, just as a something, this is the same pen, but look at how this looks a little thinner and crisper than it does over on the Clairfontaine. It's interesting because how often do you see that? In this case, it looks like thinner, crisper lines than the Clairfontaine. I think that's the first time I've seen that one happen. No feathering, no spread, no shading whatsoever, and definitely not a problem standing against the quad rule background. That quad rule truly disappears as if it was not there when you're looking. There is no visual confusion to be had. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, and can easily continue our notes back here.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more violet or purple inks.
Here is Diatramentis Artist Ink Violet.
Here is Montegrappa Harry Potter Night Bus.
Here is Robert Oster Summer Storm.
Here is Vinta Badabil.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
The tone we're getting on a page is certainly a bit lighter, not a ton lighter, just a bit lighter and a little flatter than we had on the Clairfontaine. Now, this paper will often make an ink look flatter as a tone, so that's not an unexpected. No feather, no spread. Light shading can be seen through techniques like Technique, where the TE is a little bit lighter than the CHNI, getting lighter again. The Q darkens some, the U gets lighter, and the E at the end does become a bit darker. Stands out against the quad rule very well. Student using this, you should continue using this because it's not black, it's something just a little bit special about it. Looking at the back of the page, we can easily continue all those important lab notes because we have no bleeding and no ghosting.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Noodler's Green Marine. Here is Diatramentis Silver Gray. Here is Lamy Rhodonite. Here is Krishna Freedom Gold.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here it looks just a little bit lighter in tone than it did on the Clairfontaine. Also, the purple seems to be a little bit more present in this case, as well as that slight blue undertone. No feathering, no spread, light shading. Both, what's happening is good. Look at both on the second line where the BO is a little bit lighter. That T starts to darken just a hair. That H at the end becoming a bit darker again. Look at forward where the F and beginning of O are a bit darker. The WA little lighter, R hair darker again. And the D becomes much darker during that downstroke. Looking at the back of the page, you see how great this ink is for students, teachers, anyone working in an office where you regularly use this paper. No bleeding, no ghosting, easily writing on both sides. Such a huge winner here.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
This is a medium flow fine nib in the Retro 51 P51 model, and it gives a very dark purple, fairly consistent with small touches of shading. Off camera, I used a wet fine to see if I could keep the darker tone through all the papers. It did stay darker through all the papers, still didn't feather, but the ink did get even deeper into the paper. So kind of a little warning there about doing that. So as a happy compromise, I go for a medium flow fine or medium pen to keep this great ink and avoid any bleeding issues.